Hi, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is November 16th, and please turn to page 50 in your magazine. And I really hope you have a copy of the magazine in front of you, because we're going to be talking about a story, a novel that was made into a movie, and it is complex.
Yeah, it's a story that has a lot of twists and turns. I suppose that if you're not a person that's interested in kind of like a single setting, this is not the book for you. If you like a lot of things that happen and a big adventure across multiple places, well, get ready. Saddle up, because this is the perfect story for you.
And if you like animals in general and horses in particular, then I think you might really enjoy this. Our title is War Horse. War Horse. Okay, let's jump right into our article. This is part one of a two-part article. Numerous novels have been written about the horrors of war, but War Horse is indeed a unique tale. The main character of this children's book, written by Michael Morpurgo, is a young horse named Joey. The story sadly begins with Joey being taken away from his mother and sold to Ted Narracott, a drunken farmer with financial problems. Albert, the farmer's son, soon grows very fond of the colt and takes good care of him. Albert is heartbroken when his father, due to his desperate need of money, sells Joey to an army officer who wants to turn the animal into a war horse.
While in the military, Joey becomes good friends with another horse named Topthorn, and they are shipped to France to join the fighting during World War I. There, they see the death and suffering of soldiers and take part in battles. However, the horses are captured by the Germans, who make them pull carts full of wounded soldiers. The German soldiers respect Joey and Topthorn because they save many soldiers' lives. Shortly, the Germans move their hospital to another battlefield and give the horses to an old man and his granddaughter, whose name is Emily. Just as Albert adored Joey, so does Emily. But when another group of German soldiers sees the two horses, they seize them and use them to pull heavy military equipment. Forced to work extremely hard, the horses become thin and weak, and Topthorn dies from exhaustion.
Saddened by his beloved friend's death, alone, and terrified by a tank, Joey accidentally runs into some barbed wire and gets badly injured. A German soldier and a British soldier come to help free Joey and toss a coin to see who will keep him. The English soldier wins and takes the horse to the animal hospital, at which, coincidentally, Albert works. Wow, that's a really surprising twist in the plot. It brings us back to Albert, mentioned at the beginning of the story. Let's go back over the whole thing and pay attention to each twist in the plot and all the characters and places, because there are a lot of them, and you kind of need to keep the story straight in your mind in order to enjoy the piece. All right, so War Horse is interesting, and it does have the literal meaning here of a horse that is used for war. And by the way, I read a 10-volume history. It's actually a biography of Abraham Lincoln. It was all about the Civil War. And it was just devastating to read, of course, of the human suffering and death, but so many animals died in the war. You think of all these animals, they were pulled in for use in the war. A horse would get injured, they'd just have to throw it away, and they'd steal a horse and then probably ruin another horse. So many animals died in the Civil War, a lot of mules and a lot of horses especially. All right, so there are animals used to fight a war. That's one thing. Now we still use them sometimes. We use dogs actually a lot in war because dogs will like sniff out bombs and things like that. And horses are still used, but in the past they were used much more because we did not have all of the modern military equipment that we have now.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, this is pretty much the last major war in which you have a lot of horses running around. This is where the last of the wars of old technology meet the wars of new technology. This is a big dividing line, and it's very appropriate that we're talking about it. In fact, so because today is November 16th, World War I ended on November 11th, 1918, which is 103 years ago this week. So it's very apropos that we're talking about this topic.
Right. I want to mention one more thing about the word war horse. It also has a metaphorical use. So, oh, that old war horse?
Yeah.
That means something that you have used over and over and over again, and it always does the job. It may not be fancy or impressive, but it always does the job. So that old war horse. Can you think of something that we might call a war horse?
When you were describing it, I was thinking of something I might have, but I couldn't think of something specific. However, what I did think of, when you said that it's not fancy and it's not like beautiful, in fact, as a matter of fact, I always think of a war horse as something that's kind of beaten up, something that looks a little old and raggedy, but as a matter of fact, is still really good. I would think of something like maybe like my grandfather's tools or something.
Yeah.
They've been used for like 30, 40, 50 years, and they're still in great condition.
Say like a plow.
Right.
That old war horse, it still works really well. It does the job. Maybe a bicycle or a car or something. We could call it a war horse. Something that you rely on because it's very reliable. It does the job. All right, let's go to our first sentence. Numerous novels have been written about the horrors of war, but War Horse is indeed a unique tale. Now, this is setting the scene. It's preparing us for what this article is about. Now, you may look at a book and think, oh, it's just another war novel. I don't want to read about that. But this one is telling you may want to think twice because this book is really special.
Do you have a favorite war novel?
Yeah, I think it's called Red Badge of Courage.
That's exactly the book I was thinking. I swear to God, yeah.
I
was just thinking
me.
Red Badge of Courage is fantastic.
Because that was on the reading list that I followed years ago, and I never got to it, and I thought, I better read this book, and I just wept. It was so impressive.
It's fantastic. That's so funny that you also thought it, and it's also a book about World War I. The Red Badge of Courage is it's an excellent book. So there you go.
I think I loved it so much because it talked about how war is not at all like we imagine it. Like you go into the battlefield, you have a clear battlefield, you go in there and you fight, and you're brave and you get your honors. No. Yeah, and you can't even figure out where the war is. You don't know what the heck you're doing. And you have to deal with terror and what's the opposite of courage? Being a coward. Cowardice. Yeah. There's a lot about cowardice and how do you behave afterwards when they're going to give you an honor and you know that you are a coward.
Yeah, it's so a very similar kind of idea is what we're going to be talking about today is this horse that's going to see these horrible things.
Right. Okay. But this is a special book. Give it a chance. Don't just write it off and say, I don't read war novels. This one will be worth reading, they're telling us. The main character of this children's book, written by Michael Morpurgo, is a young horse named Joey. Now, this one kind of made me jump. Oh, my gosh. This is for children?
Why? I mean, you can write. I remember I read The Red Badge of Courage in 7th or 8th grade.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So you can write stories about war, but you're more careful about the details. There's less blood and guts of it.
And I think it depends on the age. You have to be at least, say, 8 or 9 years old. It'll be really hard for real little children to read something like this. I could mention another book that's just kind of a stereotype, which is War and Peace, which is truly probably the greatest novel ever written.
It's a good doorstop. Very heavy book.
But it's so worth it. If you have a chance to read it, if you read it in translation, that's fine. It's totally worth it. But Red Badge of Courage is shorter, and it's a really great book. All right, so in any case, we have a children's book here, and I think they mean for maybe young people starting maybe age 10, I would say. Yeah, and here's the author's name, and then the horse's name is Joey. Next sentence, the story sadly begins with Joey being taken away from his mother and sold to Ted Narracott, a drunken farmer with financial problems. And what popped into my mind is the movie Babe. Have you seen Babe?
Yeah, Babe's great.
I had never watched it, but Tim Ferriss recommended it. Now, he's a very famous blogger and podcaster. He said he loved this movie, and I thought it was just a children's movie. But if Tim Ferriss likes it, it must be good. So I haven't finished it. I'm still watching it.
It's fantastic. It's well worth your time.
And what happens in all farms is that animals are bred, and then the young have to be taken away from their parents. All right, so this often happens. And what you worry about is into whose hands will they fall? And in this case, it's a guy who's a drunken farmer with financial problems. Does not sound good.
Yeah, horses are expensive. Having financial or money problems is always a bad sign.
Albert, the farmer's son, soon grows very fond of the colt and takes good care of him. So we're kind of worried what's going to happen. But at least the son of the farmer is not drunk. And they have financial problems, but the son doesn't have to probably worry about that so much. And he really loves this little horse. The colt is a young horse and does take good care of him.
Yeah, it's a very specific word. If you follow American football, you'll know the colts. It just means young horse. It's under the age of 4.
That is male. If
That's
it is female, it's a filly, F-I-L-L-Y, filly. Albert is heartbroken when his father, due to his desperate need of money, sells Joey to an army officer who wants to turn the animal into a war horse. So this is his fate. He was lucky in a bad situation, but now he's going to go into war. And this is not shocking because if he weren't sold, he probably would have been stolen and just used by the soldiers.
So the story Warhorse actually comes from a lucky chance meeting that Marpergo had with 3 surviving World War I soldiers. Now, this story came out in 1982, so this was written quite a long time ago. And today, there are no surviving World War I soldiers. So it's lucky that he met them when he did. They had been kind of traveling through Marpergo's hometown, and after meeting them, they had regular kind of meetups. And through those stories, they would talk about not just what happened to the soldiers, but also the horses. The soldiers made a point of talking about how bad they felt to the horses, how bad they felt for the horses, and that's where the story comes from.
So that's a lot of precious historical knowledge he got firsthand.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Let's continue to our second paragraph. While in the military, Joey becomes good friends with another horse named Topthorn, and they are shipped to France to join the fighting during World War I.
Now here they are personifying the horses. They're presenting the horses as the main characters of the book as though they think like people and have the same kinds of things going on as people. But I have to say, based on my interactions with animals, we have much more in common than we don't have in common. So a lot of people will tell people who are studying animals, don't try to treat them just as people. You're imagining that they have friendships, emotions. You're not imagining. They do.
Yeah.
And this is absolutely true, whatever you say. People made that accusation of Jane Goodall, but you go listen to her. She will tell you a thing or two.
World War I happened from 1914 to 1918. If you read a bunch of history, you may see it called the Great War.
The Great War.
It wasn't called World War I at the time because it was the first World War, and it also they didn't have a name for it. That all came later.
They had another name for it, the War to End All Wars.
Yes, yeah. But they didn't say this is World War I.
No.
Because do we know a second one is going to happen?
The reason that World War I happened is kind of absurd. Just look it up online. It was just a really silly incident, although there were other things that were kind of boiling in the background. But they thought that if we just get through this war, we're never going to have war again. And
yeah,
it
there's
wasn't,
a lot of optimism afterwards. A lot of starry-eyed optimism after the war.
And it wasn't long before we ended up in World War II. Okay, let's continue.
There, they see the death and suffering of soldiers and take part in battles.
And that's what you expect. You need these animals to transport troops and transport provisions. Provisions are the things you eat and the things you need to use. So, of course, when you're in there, you're going to see a lot of suffering.
Now, we know a soldier is a person that fights in an army. It actually comes from the Roman word for a shilling, a gold coin, because in the past there weren't like people you joined to like support your country. You became a soldier because it was a good career choice if you survived.
All right.
And that's the word soldier literally means money.
Okay, this is a good time to teach the word mercenary.
That's literally the way they were thought of in Rome. They were simply mercenaries, not the way we think of soldiers.
Mercenary is a soldier who fights only for money, not because he supports a certain country or idea. M-E-R-C-E-N-A-R-Y. M-E-R-C-E-N-A-R-Y.
Let's continue to our next sentence. However, the horses are captured by the Germans, who make them pull carts full of wounded soldiers.
Now, I don't know about you, but this creates a lot of very vivid images in my brain. Does it do that to you too?
Yes. Bandages around eyeballs, people with no legs, that like really bad. When you're wounded, this is much more serious than just hurt.
Yeah, and piled into carts being pulled by horses. That's really a powerful image.
The German soldiers respect Joey and Topthorn because they save many soldiers' lives.
Now that makes you feel a little better here because when you think of Germans in war, frankly, most of us will think of cruelty.
It's of course the Germans have, especially around World War II, had a very, very well-earned reputation for fighting, for doing some very terrible things. If we have time, there's a little bit of context we can add here. That, as a matter of fact, a lot of these regular soldiers weren't so interested in fighting. People in World War I really saw this as kind of, I forget the term it was used, but it was a war where they would talk about lions being led by a donkey. They understood that people at the leadership of the war weren't necessarily the best people, and they weren't fighting for the right reasons. It was just, here I have to shoot at this guy, because if I don't shoot at him, my commander behind me will shoot me and kill me.
Yeah.
This was, a lot of people were fighting unwillingly in this war.
Oh boy, let's keep going.
Shortly, the Germans move their hospital to another battlefield and give the horses to an old man and his granddaughter, whose name is Emily.
Now that sounds like another turn for the better.
Yeah, it sounds really nice. Let's continue. Just as Albert adored Joey, so does Emily. But when another group of German soldiers sees the two horses, they seize them and use them to pull heavy military equipment.
Now, this is what I was referring to earlier. In any war, when your forces are coming through an area, and if they don't have the things that they need at hand, they will just take whatever is there. And that is true of every country. If you look at Chinese history, man, you better not be in the path of war, or you're just going to have all your stuff stolen. They're going to come and live in your house, kick you out, eat all your food, take your animals, ruin your fields. That just happens in war.
There's a phrase that's often said when soldiers do this. It's to rape and plunder.
Rape and plunder,
rape and plunder. And I feel like we discussed this at some point, but maybe it was another time. Rape means like you force sex on another person. But in the past, rape also, and more importantly, meant to kidnap. That was the initial first meaning of it. So when to rape and plunder was more to steal people or steal things that were useful. Plunder was to take your money and jewelry, and there may have been forced sex. All of that does happen, of course, in war. But the original meaning for rape and plunder was to steal and take things for yourself to support your own war efforts.
And that all happens in probably any war.
Yeah. Let's continue. Forced to work extremely hard, the horses became thin and weak, and Topthorn dies from exhaustion.
So they are being worked really too hard, not getting enough food and rest. And then we have a very sad incident when Topthorn dies. Okay, let's move on to our last paragraph. Saddened by his beloved friend's death, alone, and terrified by a tank, Joey accidentally runs into some barbed wire and gets badly injured. Now, if you run into it, that's worse than just kind of walking by it and getting scratched by it. If you run into it at high speed, you will get very badly injured.
So this makes me think of the 2011 movie, that War Horse, that was created by Steven Spielberg. Because in the movie, there's a scene. I watched I never saw this movie. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know this movie existed, and I thought it would be like a corny movie. It was like nominated for Picture of the Year.
Steven Spielberg.
I know, it's like a really well-received movie. I had no idea. But they show a scene where the horse runs into barbed wire, and it's a real horse.
Oh my gosh.
I looked and I was thinking, is this computer generated? Is it a CG horse? And no, it's not. So it made me think about, well, how did Steven Spielberg do this? Because I know Steven Spielberg cares about animals.
And
I know
doesn't want to injure them when he's making movies.
So this made me think of the label at the end of the movies. No animals were harmed in the making of this film.
Movie. Yeah.
That's right. And the reason they have those is because in the past, just like we talk about how careless people were with horses in the past in real war, they also were really terrible to horses in movies, especially horses.
Not just horses,
many other
any
animals.
animal.
That's right. There are movies where horses ran through real minefields. They ran off cliffs. They kill them. It was crazy. And so it took until 1940 before you had the first movie kind of watched to make sure no animals were hurt. But that label, the first time that label appeared saying, hey, we know animals didn't get hurt here. The director was trying to do the right thing. That label did not appear until 1972.
Oh, really?
Isn't that unbelievable?
But you said that in 1940 they were careful.
It was first audited. That's right. But that label didn't appear. They ran into trouble. They tried to avoid the Animal Humane Society.
Yeah.
They avoided them for years and years and years. And it was only until there was a contract negotiation that people were like, okay, we'll have these people on to observe the animals, make sure they're being fed, make sure they're not being starved. Ridiculous things happened in movies. And it was only until 1972 that we could have a label saying, hey, we know that animals were not hurt in this movie. And so if you don't want to support bad actions, you're okay to come here.
It's hard to protect ourselves from our own barbarism.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on. A German soldier and a British soldier come to help free Joey and toss a coin to see who will keep him. So they have really a good heart about this. They want to save this poor injured horse. And they do help free him, but he's still now badly injured. And so they don't really have strong feelings that, I want to keep this horse or I don't want to keep this horse. They just toss a coin. So heads I win, tails you lose. Yeah. So heads I win, tails I lose, in theory. So that's how it was decided.
And I think this also shows to what we were talking about earlier, that soldiers in World War I were not necessarily always willing to shoot and fight. You have a soldier from Britain and a soldier from Germany willing to walk up to each other, flip a coin, and peacefully accept the results. A lot of these guys were not willing to fight until their commanders had a gun at their backs and say, if you don't shoot, I will shoot you. And if the commanders were not around, if the leaders were not around, German and British soldiers were more than willing to be friends.
Exactly.
We're more than willing to get
Exactly.
along. There's the famous Christmas match where on Christmas Day they come out of the war and play soccer together.
And sing Christmas carols.
Yeah.
That's happened many times.
That's right. And they were only willing to go back to fight until the commander started shooting fellow soldiers.
We have a special word for this, and it's called fraternize. And frater means brother. That means do not treat the enemy like your brothers. So you will find in the military, they will say, don't fraternize with the enemy. Fraternize is spelled F-R-A-T-E-R-N-I-Z-E. F-R-A-T-E-R-N-I-Z-E. Don't fraternize with the enemy. But in fact, they, like Chris said, they would much rather just be friends.
Yeah. That's a perfect word for today because that's literally what was happening. It's a good German word, too, if there ever was one.
Okay. All right, our last sentence. The English soldier wins and takes the horse to the animal hospital at which, coincidentally, Albert works.
Hey!
What a coincidence. Well, that happens in literature a lot, but it still makes you feel good because you think that there's hope, and we all have to have hope.
It's a small world.
I posted an article on Facebook to read later. I hadn't read it myself, and my cousin commented. She says, there's no hope in this piece. We really cannot survive without hope. So this book now is giving us some hope that maybe Joey will be okay. Albert is back in the story.
I suppose it must have been really overjoyous. And if this feels like it's like really like a movie type moment, I mean, I've had small coincidences in my life like this.
Yeah,
so I
me
suppose
too.
it's completely possible, right? So I mean, stranger things have happened, but I mean, yeah, hopefully this doesn't seem too implausible for you, something that's too impossible to happen.
Some weird things do happen. I mean, many years ago when I was a student in Taiwan, I was just walking around in the city, and someone said, is your name Karen? Did you used to live on Van Buren? I moved away from Van Buren when I was 4 years old. He remembered me as a baby playing in the sandbox.
Wow.
Out of the blue, since I was a baby, I didn't recognize him in Taipei.
Wow.
So weird things do happen, I can tell you.
I will say, do I have a situation like this? I recall helping a person that was moving to Taiwan, and they were at my university, and I never met the person.
Yeah.
But they said, hey, we know you're in Taiwan. Would you be willing to assist and answer questions for this person? I said, sure. And so I had seen the person's Facebook picture. And that was the only context I ever saw this person.
Yeah.
And then one day I was just walking around, and I was like, hey, that's the person I met. Like I had never physically spoken to them, nothing.
There
and I was
is.
like, hey, you're that person I helped. And so there you are. But I suppose in terms of the small world, I knew that person was coming to Taiwan. I think your story is better than mine.
That one was an utter shock. When I think back on it, I still can't imagine how it happened.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So before we go, I just wanted to make a quick note of the word financial problems. I forgot to say this earlier, so we got to look back at paragraph 1. The word financial, I said it means money, finance. But there's actually a really easy way to remember this because it doesn't look like the word money at all. If you put your thumb over A-N-C-I-A-L, you have F-I-N, add an E. You know that when you do something wrong, but it's not really serious, you won't go to prison, you pay a fine. And that fine in finance means money. You have to pay the money. So you can write that F-I-N-E, pay a fine right there. And that's a really easy way to remember this important word that you'll use really regularly.
Now, here's hoping that none of you have serious financial problems to deal with. But this is all we have time for today. However, tune in next time to hear part 2 of Warhorse. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.